My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Well, Jesus, as we listen to the gospel for today, we pray that you will give us hearts that are truly attentive to hear your voice, because getting it right seems to be a huge part of what you're saying in the gospel today. So we listen. You say, "Alas for you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you who pay your tithe of mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, good faith. These you should have practiced without neglecting the others. You blind guides, straining out gnats and swallowing camels. Alas for you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you who clean the outside of cup and dish and leave the inside full of extortion and intemperance. Blind Pharisee, clean the inside of cup and dish first, so that the outside may become clean as well." Well, Jesus, you do not mince your words at all whenever you're speaking to these scribes and Pharisees today, and you call them hypocrites because they have become so focused on little details without seeing the bigger picture. And before we rush to point the finger at those scribes and Pharisees, we really hear in this encounter, Jesus, that you're speaking to us too, because often we too can fall into the same trap. We get lost in little details and we neglect the bigger picture. We think of just how simple and how annoying it can be whenever somebody is telling a story and they get stuck on a few details and, oh, I can't remember now, was the car red or was it a slight shade of maroon? And now maybe, and you think, just for goodness sakes, would you get to the point? And if that annoys us in something simple like an ordinary conversation or somebody telling a joke or an anecdote, then how much more annoying and serious is it whenever we're focusing on small little details or aspects of our religious faith and we're neglecting the bigger things? Justice, mercy, good faith. And you're trying to open our eyes, as well as the eyes of those scribes and Pharisees today, to see, are we getting stuck on little things? And it can happen so much in the church, especially when it comes to maybe styles of prayer or places of worship. We can get hung up on little details. And we neglect to see that really our hearts are made for you, Jesus, and our worship and all of the little details of our life of prayer or piety should really be leading us closer to you. But sometimes we make the small little detail, the nitty-gritty things more important, and we lose sight of you. That our prayer, or perhaps fixing the time or the place of our prayer, has less to do about actually growing in love of you or growing in union with you. So help us to set aside all of those little things that are getting in the way. And the word that you single out for them is hypocrites. Ooh, that's a stinging rebuke. A hypocrite. Nobody wants to be called a hypocrite. And we instantly recognize what that word means. Somebody who says one thing but does another. This word hypocrite, hypocrites in Greek, is an actor. A person who stands on a stage and who recites a script, often to a very convincing degree. And here is where the hypocrisy comes in, because often, perhaps these little practices that we have of our faith can look very convincing on the outside, but are not actually coming from our heart, and are not coming from a place of deep personal union with you. And that's what we want to avoid, that we can get fixated on little practices of our faith without really opening up our heart to you. This can happen to us very easily. We go to Mass on Sunday and we get hung up on little details about what the church looked like or what the priest has said. And we forget that actually we're here for worship, and we're here to receive you, Jesus, in the Eucharist. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to avoid the little things getting in the way of our union with you. Hypocrite. Sometimes the show that we put on can be very convincing. I remember we used to always put on plays whenever I was in the seminary. Comedy plays, of course, nothing too serious. And one year I was the starring role in the play Around the World in 80 Days, playing the French Passepartout. And so convincing was my French accent, apparently, that an Irish nun simply could not believe afterwards that I was actually from the same country as her. Look, we can be very convincing at times whenever we're trying to put on a show. And sometimes we can be very convincing as well whenever we want to try and put on a good pious show, that we want to look as if we're doing the right things and saying the right things, especially if that's about gaining the respect or the admiration of other people. But where is our heart in worshipping God? And I heard a beautiful story recently, which maybe just takes us from the other side of the whole question about hypocrisy or of acting the part, about a Jesuit priest who in the early days, just as communism was beginning to crumble in Albania, he was sent from Italy on mission to Albania to begin again a little bit the life of the Jesuit community in that place. Now, in Albania, there had been very harsh repercussions and indeed bloody persecution of Christians for many, many years. And many priests and lay people and religious had been tortured and killed, and simply praying at home was a crime. And so religious practice became something which was very deeply embedded and very secret. And as a consequence of the persecution, the Jesuit priests who had been operating in Albania all went underground. And so in these last dying days of the communist regime, whenever things all over the communist world were beginning to crumble, these Italian Jesuit priests went back into that country to try and, first of all, find the Jesuit priests who had been long in hiding, and then to bring them back and establish a community again with an open church where people could come to worship. It took them a long time, but they were able to identify through speaking to people that there were 3 Jesuit priests who were hiding with families in the mountains in the north of Albania. And recounting the story, the priest told me that these areas were so remote that there weren't even roads, and they had to walk for many hours over rough terrain in order to reach the places where 2 of these Jesuit priests were hiding. And when they found the families and were able to try and eventually get their way inside the door in order to speak to the men whom they believed to be the priests, they found it very difficult to open up these discussions of trust, and that they would really believe that they were Jesuits themselves who had come to find them and to restart the whole life, because such was the persecution, and there were so many spies and different actions of the police. And eventually they were able to get and to win over the trust of these 2 priests, but they could not find the 3rd because they were so deeply undercover, if you like. These men were now in their 70s and had spent over 40 years hiding out secretly, worshipping God and administering the sacraments to very, very small numbers of people in secret. If you like, they were behaving externally as if they were farm labourers, as if they were just doing ordinary meaningless tasks, but they never lost a sense of who they were interiorly. They were Christians and they were priests. And eventually they were able to find the 3rd, who was able to come forward and to identify himself as a priest whenever he saw that they were indeed genuine. So look, what we want to avoid is going through the external appearance of everything looking good, when inside the heart is not good and is not given to worship. And we think of those who have suffered so much the consequences of external action, but whose hearts remain pure and for you, Jesus. Give us the strength that we might too be faithful, in order that we will not be hypocrites, but that we will love you, Jesus, with all of our heart, our mind, and our soul. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations that you have communicated to me during this meditation. I ask your help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.